We had an interview with an end user who was explaining how she was using the tool, and she explained like, on this page, I need an export to Excel button. I start asking why. The analyst jumps in, is like, okay, which column do you need to export? It's like, no. Wait a minute. Let me ask why. Okay, you don't have an export to Excel button today, so can you show how you do it? So she overlines the whole table and she copies and she pastes it into Excel. No, what do you do with this nice table? And then she goes into the Excel filters and she goes into two specific columns and she basically removes some of the content. So we work with financial operations, and she explains like, I don't care about all the operations that are finished. I only want to see the ones that are not finished. If we had just stopped at the business analyst, we would have had an export to Excel button on the screens, and then the lady would still be exporting the stuff to Excel to see the active operation. But we work on the web. We can actually add filters in tables in the browser. So that's kind of the big difference.
What we seek shapes what we build. This is If You Seek by Useberry. Hi there, welcome back to If You Seek by Useberry. This is Nicole Fataki, and today's episode is all about what it really takes to design products that work in the real world, especially when things get complex. I'm joined by Stephanie Walter, a UX researcher and strategist based in Luxembourg, with over 15 years of experience working on enterprise products, inclusive design, and accessibility. Stephanie focuses on understanding how people use complex systems, not how they think, and turning that into practical, usable, and inclusive experiences. She's also someone who actively shares her thinking through writing, teaching, and speaking, especially around UX research, accessibility, and the realities of working in product teams. I'm really looking forward to this one because we'll be talking about the real challenges and trade offs behind designing inclusive enterprise products. Stephanie, welcome to If You Seek.
Hello, thanks for having me.
All right, so to start, I'd love to ground this in real work. When you think about the enterprise products you've worked on, what makes designing them especially challenging from both a UX and inclusion perspective? Can you walk us through a specific project where that complexity really showed up?
So yeah, I think I want to define maybe first enterprise UX because for the listeners who are not familiar with the term, it means that I design products that get used on a daily basis by employee, basically. So in my case, depending on the product I worked for automotive industry where we had iOS application and web-based product that were used in car dealerships. Now I work for finance, meaning my users are technically colleagues, but I work on the IT side, they work on the business side. And yeah, basically we are designing, developing the tool that help them do their job on a daily basis. So yeah,
Very cool.
it's challenging because we are designing the tool that the colleagues are using on the daily basis, and when they're not happy, they will tell you. Trust me. So yeah, in my case, it's kind of it's really cool on one side because you work with your colleagues, so it means it's kind of easier to access the users than when I was working for the automotive industry where we had to like ask to go to the car dealerships, so it was a little bit more complex at that time to gain access to the users. But yeah, I think biggest difficulty is low UX maturity and low accessibility maturity. It's really about maturity, meaning every time you arrive in such environment, at least for me, and even like working for the same client, when I arrive on your new project for this client, I still have to explain again, explain why you need to do UX research, explain how does it work, how is UX research different from business analysis? Because sometimes they would have, I don't know about other countries, but in Luxembourg especially, we have people who are called business analysts. And in a lot of places, they are the one who go to the users, but they kind of ask, what do you want? What do you want? Why do you want to put it on the screen, you know?
Okay.
I'm caricaturing, of course. I had like BAs who go a little bit beyond that, but often I arrive in places where like, well, we have someone who talks to the users. That's the business analyst. So why do you need to talk to the users? So I usually give a very specific example where we had an interview with an end user who was explaining how she was using the tool, all of that. And she explained like, on this page, I need an export to Excel button. It's like, okay, fine. I start asking why. The analyst jumps in and is like, okay, which column do you need to export? It's like, no. Wait a minute. Let me ask why. So I ask why. And I go, okay, you don't have an export to Excel button today, so can you show how you do it? So she overlines the whole table and she copies and she pastes it into Excel. It's like, okay, fine. No, what do you do with this nice table? And then she goes into the Excel filters and she goes into 2 specific columns and she basically removes some of the content. So we work with financial operations. And she explains, like, I don't care about all the operations that are finished. I only want to see the ones that are not finished, like the ongoing ones. And this is why I have to export the table to Excel and put a filter into Excel. I was like, if we had just stopped at the business analyst, we would have had an export to Excel button on the screens. And then the lady would still be exporting the stuff to Excel to see the active operation. But we work on the web. We can actually add, filters in tables in the browser. So that's kind of the big difference, It's at some point when you start asking why, and when instead of just listen, I'm not saying you should not listen to people, but if you listen to them, you observe them and you ask them, okay, you don't have that. How do you do it today? Walk me through, show me how you work. Then you arrive to a place where people are like, oh, actually, yeah, I don't really need an export to Excel. It's just the way I do it today. If you give me a filter that lets me remove the non-active one, I would be perfectly fine. Even better if they can be filtered out by default. And then if I need to see the order back, okay, fine, And we have to do a lot of things like that where we explain to people, okay, the difference and the reason why I want to go to the users and talk to them is because we need this kind of data. If we want to build tools for people that are usable and used, because you can build something if it's not used, it's not very really worth.
Yeah.
Then we need this sort of thing. So it's a lot about advocating as to why we need a UX researcher, UX designers, and then the same for accessibility. Often people don't know a lot about accessibility, or they kind of know about building accessibility. It's like, oh, we have an elevator and we have a sports team and there's like one guy, he's in a wheelchair and he's playing tennis. It's like, okay, cool, nice, But then when you start talking about accessibility of digital tools, of systems that people have to work with on a daily basis, a lot of the people, again, in enterprise, they have no idea this exists, basically. So you have to then, again, explain a lot and go into a lot of levels of explaining your job, why it's important over and over again. So I think, yeah, it's like, that's, I think, the biggest challenge. Having, after 15 years, to advocate for what you do as if it was year one of your career, But yeah, I'm a consultant. I kind of signed for that, I guess, as being a consultant who works with multiple clients. But yeah, I think that's kind of the challenge sometimes when people don't really understand what you do and why they would need it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. After 15 years, yeah.
Yeah.
And it really shows how layered the kind of work is. And I guess, like, once that complexity is there, you just can't remove it. You have to work with it. You have to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's go a little bit deeper into that. So can you walk us through a case where you had to design around a very complex workflow or data heavy interface? What made it difficult, and how did you approach it? What did you decide to simplify, and what couldn't you simplify, even if you wanted to?
So I don't have a concrete example because it's every single day. It's all the time, So at the moment we are working on very complex processes, and I think the complexity is that there is one happy path. It exists, but then once you start talking to the user, this happy path actually has hundreds of exceptions. So you'll have like, in theory, a process somewhere written by some people. This is how we are supposed to work. And then you have the reality of how people actually work. So often in this case, what we tend to do is we try to like have a visualization of the process, meaning use a flow, or I don't remember how the analysts call it, but it's like you have a Microsoft tool to visual these very complex processes. Sometimes it goes into too much detail even for us. So we try to kind of understand from a user perspective, what is the process, what tool they have to use, because sometimes they have to do something in multiple. So this kind of exercise where you try to map the process, which is kind of in between a user journey map, because you will have multiple tools and system, and a user flow where you would have this kind of happy flow and then all the variants around it. So I think what helps is really like having a visual way to not forget about anything into those very, very, very complex processes, to make sure that you cover everything. And in order to do so, often you want to talk to the end users. Because I've been in so many situations where I talk to the users, and when I ask them, how do you work? And they explain to me something. I'm like, this is not how the business people explained at the beginning of the project that the user were working. So what is happening in here, you know? And sometimes you have this kind of conflicts where some parts of the place where you work want to push a process, and some other parts, or the silo, or the group, or the people, depends, they don't want to change the way they work. So it's yeah, so that's, I think, like a big challenge with complexity. It's not that much about how much data you put on the screen. It's also the complexity of the processes, and making sure that you find kind of an in-between where everyone will be able to work with the system, even though they don't always 100% follow the process and might need some workarounds, or not really backdoors, but sometimes they will do something outside of the system. To give you a concrete example, we have a way in the system for people to review stuff. But then some of those people, when you talk to the assistants, they go, yeah, but you know, my boss, he doesn't want to go into IT systems. He wants me to print the stuff. And then he reviews and writes the review on the piece of paper. And then I have to bring the changes to the system. And that's not going to change. You don't say no to your boss. So you have this idealistic way of working where everyone goes into the system. In reality, you have to accept that you will never cover all the cases. So you need to have some flexibility in what you design, so that people can still work with the tool, not being blocked.
Okay.
But still enforcing these complex processes. And then, yeah, you have the data. Often it's kind of the same. A lot of people will need the data, but then we have big screens actually, but we also have people who have a very small resolution on those big screens, because since the screen is so big, the data is small. So at the end of the day, you have big screen, but still not a lot of data. You cannot display that much data because it's so zoomed in. So what we usually do is we apply principles like progressive disclosure. That is, find the common denominator. So you have to design this, 20 column table. What are the 5, 6, 7 columns everyone will need? And those go to the left, because everyone will see those. And then when the further you go to the right, the less you see. So either you have like gigantic table, horizontal scroll, or sometimes we have mechanism like we know some parts of the bank needs some data, the other part needs other ones, and some people are in between, and depending on what they're working, they need some data and then other. So we end up with ways to show, hide columns. So we have a lot of customization of the interface. And the goal is, like often you have designer who will go like, yeah, but if you put customization, it means you fail as a designer, because you don't want to take, like, design is about making choices. Yeah, But at some point, if you have many people who need the same set of data but in different way, you cannot choose for them. The only thing you can do is make sure that they have all the data they need, and then depending, it's flexible enough so that they can choose. Sometime I need this column. It's mostly about dates or numbers or figures. Do you need the dates? Do you need the amounts? Things like that, depending. So yeah, we have a lot of customization mechanism in a lot of the views, so that again, you can work with it the way you want to work with it. So we have like the theory of everyone needs that, and then the actual thing where people can customize the view.
Okay.
But we never try to oversimplify, because if we try to do that, then people are lacking some data and might not be able to do their job.
Yeah, it's like you're removing what users actually need.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
and I guess that's where your experience really shows. So knowing what to leave in, what to take out, and to even understand that level of detail, research becomes really important.
Yeah.
And in these environments, it's not always straightforward. So, what does UX research actually look like in these contexts where users are busy, workflows are complex, and access can be limited?
So here again, it depends. At the moment, I'm very lucky because I work internally for the clients, meaning I, in theory, have access to anyone. That's theory. In practice, often you might need to wait for approval. Sometimes they might want to cherry pick a couple of people. They might want to ask for volunteers. So even if in theory I have some names I know I can contact, I often need to ask permission and ask for, which is again perfectly fine. You want to make sure that you don't bring chaos to the people, and they have a job to do. So on a daily basis, they cannot like just be bothered with everyone in IT asking them questions. So we do a lot of things where, even though we know who we want to contact, it might take a couple of weeks to put everything in place and all of that, just to make sure that they know they will need to give us 1 hour in the next 3 weeks, and they agree and all of that. But often once this is in place, people are very reactive. Like in UX, you often have a lot of no-shows. I have to admit that here, for now, most of the time I have 20 sessions. I have like one person who doesn't show up, and they would often send me a message on Teams like, "Oh, sorry, I have a meeting. Can we reschedule?" So
Very
I think
positive.
it's an amazing rate, because if you do like research in B2C, you have a lot of no shows. So they're actually quite involved, at least on the project I worked for, because it's things they have to work on a daily basis. So, and then like, I think the methods are also always kind of, I don't know how often you do observational studies, for instance, if you do B2C research. We do that a lot. A lot of the research we do is like, okay, we want to work on this specific topic. Please show me how you do that today. So at the moment, we're working on understanding how people organize their work on a week. So it's like we have a script for the interview with a couple of questions. And often it goes into the direction of, oh, this looks fun, interesting. Can you show me? And often people organize their ways in so many different flavors of, I use Outlook, I create an Excel sheet, I use Task, I have sticky notes on my desktop. I have no idea how you put sticky notes on a Windows desktop. Like, I don't know. I didn't even know this feature existed. So you end up in this, oh, please share your screen, show me and stuff. And we collect a lot of artifacts like that. I have tons of screenshots of Excel sheets people use to work. And I tell them I'm not interested into the data. I usually ask them, can you send me the Excel sheet so I can screenshot it? And you can remove the data. I'm interested into like the structure, the columns, things like that. So, and it was the same for when I was working in car dealerships. We would do a lot of observation. Like I spent a whole day shadowing a team in a car storage facility to understand. We did kind of the car journey. Weird. because the car is not a user, but
Yes.
basically you bring the car back to the storage facility. They were doing rental.
Okay.
And this was like a storage facility for rental car, and they were losing cars because of the way they were working. Because like the car arrives, you clean it up and then you park it somewhere, and on the key you put a piece of paper and you put the number. But then someone has to move the car for a reason, and then another colleague moves another car, and nobody updates it. And then 3 days later I was like, but this car, this is the number, it's not in the parking spot. Where is the car? And they said, yeah, sometimes it takes us a whole day to find the car. It's like, okay. And I'm able to explain that to you because we literally spent the whole day. We went there, we followed the car, we observed that, and all of that. So I think it's very important when you work in enterprise, in tools that people use on a daily basis, to be allowed and to have the opportunity to go and really observe how people do the job. Because otherwise you cannot really design or develop the tools that are supposed to help them to the job. So I say, yeah, like in terms of methods, we do a lot of observation. Then there's also a lot of jargon. I'm so tired of acronyms.
What?
Again, so many acronyms everywhere. And at the end of the day, I have to ask people about the acronyms. I have a glossary of the acronyms and all of that because, again, you arrive in, how can I say? You arrive and you observe people who are used to working in a certain way and they have their own vocabulary.
Yes.
So sometimes you need to be prepared. Maybe you need to, like often I ask analysts or other people, okay, I'm going to work with this part. Is there anything I need to be aware? Are there going to be weird names or stuff that I need to understand in advance just to be able to be sure that when they talk to me and they say something that I don't quite catch, I'm still able to follow, you know?
Yeah.
If really I've never heard of it, I will ask them to explain, of course, but sometimes you don't have the time. So yeah, research is also about making sure that the weird jargon that the user use, you are familiar with it. Otherwise, you might struggle a little bit as well.
Wow. Yeah, I get the acronym struggle. Oh, I don't love them. I don't love them. And have you ever discovered that people were using the system in a completely different way than it was designed for?
Oh. I have interviews that are recorded, and during the interview in my mind I was like, this is a security breach. I will not put that in the so we have a lot of shadow IT, and sometimes people would do stuff you're like, okay, you're not allowed to do that, you're not supposed to do that, and I've never heard that you're doing that. I don't want you to get into trouble. Let's talk about something else, you know. So yeah, we have stuff like that. We have a lot of shadow IT. So we have people who will use Excel for anything, which I'm amazed with. Like for the future, I don't really have users who use things in a weird way, but I have the opposite. We have multiple tools that are linked to our main tool, and people are so used to using our tool to access the rest that sometimes they report bugs that are not on us. You know, this is the other tool, but for the end user, they arrive on our tool, and we built a very, very advanced search. And a lot of the other tools have a crappy search. So what they do, they search for something in our tool, and then they expect direct links to the same thingy in the other ones. So our search has kind of become super complex with a lot of filters. No, actually, yeah, the search is a good example because people search, but they also don't search. Meaning, so you have someone who is looking for something. Okay, good. You have some people who use the search because they have a colleague who works on a specific type of operation and they want to see what it looked like, or they want to do something that is like something else in the system. They don't know if this something else exists, but so you have people who would say, yeah, I work with, I don't know, trains in this country. So I want to check what other things were done with trains in this specific area of the country. So they are searching, but they don't really know what they're looking for. They're kind of fishing like, oh, I'm working on that. So I'm curious to see what exists in the system. So that's the second type of search. And the third time is basically people who want to build lists. They do not care about clicking on the search result and arriving on the page. They care about, I want to search every single stuff between this date and this date for this country with this type of thingy and another. And then, so they will build a gigantic query that is an extract of the database, because then they want to do reporting on those items, which is again super weird because it's not really a search, But once you understand that they do that because the other tools search is less user friendly than ours, then you understand why our search became this kind of gigantic thingy where you have tons of filters that are, again, non-mandatory. They can add and remove them. So yeah, we have a search that is not used for searching or not actually used for finding things, but no, more like for building lists, basically. Yeah. I think it must be the case for other tools. Like, I think I don't know, I can imagine that when you have a database like a movie database, I could imagine that some people, they might not want to check every single movie. They might want to have a list of movie with that actor and something like that and something. So I don't think it's specific to our product. I was just super surprised the first time. I was like, but why do we have this very weird filter that brings free stuff from the database? Yeah, because building lists with the search tool. So of course we have an export to Excel button to export that list.
The things you find out.
Yeah, it was the same for car dealership. We had this application that was supposed to, the car dealership, the car mechanics was like working on the car, and then they discover a problem that was not foreseen. And it was supposed to take a picture of this problem, and then you can send it to the client with an invoice asking, hey, do you want to do the extra repairs? If you answer by 2, we can still do it today. That was the use case. And we discovered that in a lot of car dealership, what they ended up doing, they would, when the car would arrive, they would take a full video of the car to check if there's scratches on anything, and they would like just attach this to the client's folder. They would not send it to the client, but still they had this application that was linked to the specific car number and all of that. It was a new way for them to cover basically in case the client complains, like, oh, I had a scratch, you gave me my car back, but this scratch didn't exist. Well, let me check the video. So we were not expecting that, but since we provided car mechanics with a way to take pictures and videos of a car that was supposed to be only in case of problems, I was like, no, I'm going to record the whole checking the car when it arrives, keep it in like the client's folder hidden for us in case the client complains. Like, that's interesting. So maybe it should be kind of a feature, of the application then. So we can at least have a tag so they know exactly if it's a video for the client or not, So yeah, we have like, you build something and sometimes people use it in a fun way. It's like, oh.
Very interesting.
Let's make it a feature.
All right, real quick before we jump back in. You know how product teams are always trying to move faster and research teams are trying to move smarter? Well, Useberry actually helps you do both. It lets you run quick remote user tests, and honestly, they're just as easy to run as they are to share. No bottlenecks, no endless waiting around, and definitely no more guessing. It's just research that moves at the speed of product. Check it out at useberry.com. Yeah. And building on that idea of real world usage in these kind of systems, accessibility becomes another layer that isn't always obvious from the start. So in complex data heavy enterprise systems, what kinds of accessibility issues tend to show up that teams don't initially anticipate? And can you share an example where accessibility actually changed or challenged a design decision?
Often keyboard accessibility is forgotten. So this is like you will have designers who will design gigantic tables and all of that, and then the users like, how do I navigate that with a keyboard? Or even the search, like we have complex filters. People want to do tap 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 and be super quick and add things. So often when I work with developers who are not used to keyboard accessibility, we have to explain, we have to not train them, but at least explain what is expected, because we have a lot of users who actually use keyboard navigation and who will complain then. Like I remember having a discussion with someone who was complaining that in the previous version they could just like really quickly use tabulation very fast to go through the stuff, and in the new version it didn't work anymore, and they were losing a lot of time because then they had to move the mouse and all of that. Which sounds from an external perspective like, I don't know, like, okay, but you have to imagine if the person does the same thing over and over again all day long. Of course, if they have to do a lot of movement instead of just using keyboard navigation, they will be annoyed. So it's actually a legit case. So keyboard navigation. And then I think responsiveness is also something that I have to fight for a lot, because often people think that responsive design is for mobile phones, which it's legit. We use it for mobile phone, you know, and they're like, yeah, but we have so much data and no one is using the stuff on mobile, so we don't really need it to be responsive for mobile. Except that responsive design, when done well, it also helps with layout shift when people zoom in the interface, for instance, or when you have someone who has a giant screen but a very poor resolution. We usually design now at 160. That's the default that we have. We have a lot of people who have a 120 screen.
Okay.
Because we have super big screens. It's just that they go into the Windows parameter and then switch it to something lower. And I asked, like, when I went to change my computer, I asked the guy, like, what is the default resolution you put on the screen? And I explained, like, I'm surprised to see so many users who have this very, like, narrow resolution. And he says, yes, a lot of the people come back, explain that with these, like, 13-inch screens, it's too small. And then we have to put back a very, I don't know if you say big or smaller resolution, but basically everything becomes super big. And when you have an interface that is responsive, then normally, at least if you zoom in or if you display it on a smaller screen, it is supposed to adapt. So that's also something like responsive design is not technically an accessibility feature, but if you make your website responsive, you usually make sure that you don't have hidden elements when it gets smaller, layout shift, and stuff that vanish. So it's also something like that, you know. It's kind of it's in the small detail, but it's super important for a lot of our users as well.
Exactly,
We have
the
people
small
who
details.
yeah, and they will zoom in because they have poor eyesight at some point. Even I sometimes I have to zoom in at the end of the day when I'm tired and all of that. So that's super important for them.
Yeah, and it really shows how these considerations need to come in. Even the small details, as you mentioned, are actually
Yeah.
big. Yeah, and all of this leads to a lot of trade-offs in real projects, because in the end, you're always balancing multiple constraints.
Yeah.
What's a situation where you had to make a difficult trade-off between usability, accessibility, and technical constraints, and what drove that decision in the end?
So often the trade-off is when we don't have how can I say, when we don't have full flexibility on the technology, meaning sometimes you end up using a no-code solution, and then you have to basically use the little Lego brick that they bring. But then if it's not accessible, you cannot do much about it. Like I opened a ticket to one of our providers asking to underline the links, because my main color was orange, and if you have an orange text in the middle of a black text, you might, and it's not underlined, you might have issue with colorblind people, for instance. So here the trade-off, it was not really a trade-off, we just didn't have a choice, you know. technology was chosen, and it's also the same, like even if it's not a no code technology. I remember we had to work with specific JavaScript framework like React or Angular frameworks, and some of those again didn't have accessible components to start with. And then if you can choose the framework at the beginning, it's fine. But then when you arrive on a project where they're already using a framework, they've been using it for years and years and years, you're kind of stuck. So you can improve things like colors. You can ask to underline the link. You can make sure you have a keyboard. Even keyboard navigation might be tricky because sometimes if you get the components, it's so a lot of trade-off often come from technology or time when you don't have time to implement, which is always kind of a little bit sad. So yeah, and then you also have usability trade-offs because again, if so one of the big one we had, but we ended up solving was we were using Material UI on specific projects, and the tables in Material UI are nice, except when you work in finance. Your users want an Excel sheet in the browser. So the trade-off was that I did user research. So we used the ones that we had, and then I brought user research to say, look, guys, it's not enough. I need more. I need filters. I need and then since we had user research, it's developers were already convinced, but you have to convince people higher to say, okay, we're actually taking, honestly, I don't remember how many months, but I had a developer really work on tables to bring them to the level of usability and accessibility that we wanted for our users. So I was lucky, honestly, but at the same time, tables are used everywhere. So it was good investment for this too, So it was not that hard to justify, but we still had to wait for this to be developed and all of that. So yeah, often it's like technical constraints. Sometimes you are lucky, you can push to change technology or to develop something custom for something specific, whether it's for accessibility, usability, or both. Sometimes you cannot win, and then you try to do your best with what you have. At the end of the day, it's always kind of tricky.
Yeah, it involves a lot more context than people actually see. There's a lot going on behind.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that work stays pretty invisible also. And yeah, so what's something you worked on in a product that had a big impact on the experience, but most people in the company probably never noticed?
Having the ability to have URLs that you can share.
Oh,
Because, yeah, we migrated a very old tool that was developed 18 years ago at that time. And I don't remember the technology. I think it was Java applets, something like that. But basically, you had one URLs, and then everything was loading, reloading in the screen. So you had like 10 different pages technically, but they all had the same. So at that time, what they did is every single page had an export to PDF so that user could actually share the data. In the new system, we decided to have URL for everything, including search results. So the whole search query is in the URL, meaning if you do a super long query, you can bookmark it, you can relaunch it as many times as you want, and that's something that users loved. And here we did a big job on having URLs that are readable for human beings, meaning like the whole path makes sense. It's like something, then slash, you go down one level, then the number, then slash. And it's kind of, I don't think a lot of designers think about the user experience of URLs. But once you understand that, you end up with people who build gigantic table with a lot of financial operation contracts and all of that in the table. And the first thing they have at the beginning of the table is this URL. It's super important for them to see actually very quickly based on the URL, what is it, what is the number, the ID, all of that. So yeah, I didn't expect honestly URLs to be that important, but at the end of the day, yeah, it's part of those kind of invisible part of user experience that in very specific contexts, like here, make a lot of sense. And you want something clean, you want something self-explanatory for the end users. That's super important.
It's what often makes the biggest difference.
Yeah.
So interesting. I've never heard of this. Great example. Yes, Stephanie, thank you. This was such a grounded look at, what it really takes to design inclusive, complex products in real world situations. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we'll include links in the show notes to Stephanie's work, including her website, LinkedIn, and social profiles. Thanks to everyone to listening to If You Seek by Useberry. See you next time. For more exciting content, follow us on our social channels. Your reviews mean the world to us, so don't forget to leave one. And of course, hit that subscribe button to stay updated on our latest episodes. If You Seek is a platform for discussions and personal insights. The opinions presented by guests are independent and do not represent the official position of the host, Useberry, or our sponsors.